Welcome to the Freedom California podcast. I'm your host, Samuel Coleman, Outreach Director for the Freedom Foundation in California. This week I am joined by Matthew Hayward, Outreach Director for the State of Washington, and Ashley Varner, Vice President of Communications. Join us as we discuss SEIU's financial support for defunding the police, SEIU's political spending efforts, and Washington Governor Jay Inslee's proclamations. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Freedom California podcast. I'm joined again by Matt Hayward, the Washington Outreach Director, and Ashley Varner, our Vice President of Communications. My name is Sam Coleman. I'm the Outreach Director for the State of California. Today we're going to be discussing a few things, but we're going to start out today by talking about one union which actually listened to our advice, which is pretty rare. This union, well, it's not exactly the union itself. So the way that this worked was the SEIU Lavender Caucus, which is sort of an affinity group for SEIU members, which are part of the LGBTQ community and so on. What they did was they decided that they were going to stop taking union dues for a year for this caucus. So it's not SEIU, the union, stopping dues for a year, but it is SEIU's caucus, one of these caucuses, taking dues for a year. And this is very interesting because, as I think everyone on this call knows, back in March, we put an idea forward to governors in multiple states, asking them to put a 3-month moratorium on union dues as a way of sort of getting money back into the economy, putting money back into people's pockets. And this is true now, but it was especially true back then that people were losing their jobs. People were, not going to businesses because they were afraid that they were going to lose their jobs. And this would have been a really great way to put money sort of back into the system. So the question that I want to pose to the group here is the SEIU Lavender Caucus can stop their dues for a year, but SEIU itself, this giant international apparatus, can't give their members any kind of a break. Could SEIU be doing more for their members? Matt, I want to pass this over to you first.
I mean, of course they could be doing more for their members. They don't need to be taking the dues from people, especially when they're not working or being furloughed and only working part-time. Everyone else is facing budgetary problems and financial situations. Why shouldn't the union join in with that burden that we're all experiencing?
Sure. Ashley, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with Matt. They should have done this. No, give them a cookie. They did it. I'm very happy for the Lavender Coalition giving their members a break. SEIU as the grand total, the big umbrella, the parent organization, if they truly care about their members and they don't simply see them as a paycheck, then they would have done this a long time ago, because this is providing a service that everybody's hurting right now. We're all in this together. That's what we keep hearing. But the union bosses haven't had to make the sacrifices that their members have had to make. Well,
Ashley, I appreciate that you're sort of giving them the credit where credit's due, but I'm going to take that cookie away from them here in just a minute, because while they did cut their members, a break on dues, and while the amount of dues was only about $20 a year, so it's not a huge amount of money, this is not the $700, $800 that SEIU members as a whole pay. They do have some other ideas that are not so great. One of these happens to be that they completely 100% support defunding the police. So you sort of take the good with the bad, I guess. And the way that they are expressing this is they would like SEIU to disaffiliate from police unions. They're behind a group, I believe it's SEIU Drop the Cops is the name of the group, or they've been circulating this petition. So again, I want to kind of pose this question to everybody here. Do you think that SEIU will at some point actually disaffiliate, or are they just sort of towing this line, trying to be part of the, in-group calling for that now?
I think we'll have to wait and see what happens at the election. Not that we're being partisan about this, but this is clearly an agenda item of a particular party running for control of what's going on in the country. And so I think it really depends on whether or not that particular party actually gains control.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that it's SEIU. They're one of, if not the most politicized union of them all. You know, they're kind of the Walmart of unions, and they are right out in front with social justice being a primary function of what they exist to do. I often refer to a labor conference I went to before the Janus decision, where there were labor leaders from all over the state meeting. And it was very clear from that meeting that they believed the future of public sector unions was in the realm of sculpting social and cultural norms and getting involved more in politics than in representation of public employees, wages, benefits, things that unions are typically associated with doing. So it doesn't surprise me at all that SEIU said that, and it wouldn't shock me at all if they followed through in this particular instance, because it is such a social, cultural, political issue that's going on, for them to draw their battle lines, even though they'd be giving up a little money in doing so. It does follow with their ideology.
And that makes sense too, because we did do some research about exactly how much SEIU International was spending to these groups, which do support defunding the police. And what we did find was that they had supported, I believe, 24 different groups to the tune of just under $1 million that either directly said that they would support it or supported, you know, divestment or sort of shifting around these resources to other, I guess, government services. Personally, I would be shocked to find that they actually follow through on this. I am kind of the kind of person who believes that they like to wear the mask, you know, of the cool, hip, young, you know, kind of calling to defund the police kind of person. But when it comes to actually pulling out their checkbook and putting their money where their mouth is and disaffiliating, I think we've seen that they can't cut their members a break on their dues. I don't think they're going to just disaffiliate overnight. So that's sort of where I stand on this.
You know, it also gives them cover too if their unions are disenfranchised and plan on decertifying anyway, right? So it's sort of a defense. They can say they wanted to anyway when they didn't really have a choice because their members were getting ready to drop them. I received an email earlier today from a corrections union that basically said the same thing, that they're fed up with their union supporting these causes, and they are organizing an effort to decertify. So it could be a defensive play taking that stance as well. So it doesn't look like they're getting dropped. They're the ones dropping people.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. But what I'd like to do now is sort of move on to a different topic that is, I think, in the same realm as this topic, and that is SEIU's political spending post-Janus. So we ran a blog post in California about this a couple of weeks back, where we were tracking about, I believe, $39 million worth of local political spending just by SEIU. And we were commenting on how it appears that as their membership rolls are going down, we're seeing their political spending go up, because I think they've sort of acknowledged that they've lost the battle a little bit, and now they're trying to come up with a legislative fix. Matt, you're the outreach director in Washington. Have you seen anything like this?
You know, I haven't been following the money as much. I've been busy with other things. I plan to look into that more after this coming election, but they have certainly worked on legislative fixes consistently over the last several years. It's gotten worse and worse. And I think right now what we're looking at is especially with SEIU, what may happen if the political climate changes federally. Because one of our big victories has been with SEIU 775 and the scheme that SEIU has nationwide with in-home care providers and siphoning off a mass amount of money. And like you said, as members have dropped over the last few years, we've actually seen that they're getting more revenue. And part of the way they've been doing that is increasing their dues and the percentage that they are taking from their members. but we'll have to see what happens. Like I said, we're going to do a deeper dive after the election to see what the finances look like. And certainly the crackdown will be dependent on what happens federally, because there has been a push, at least with them, to prevent the union from getting direct access to the Medicaid funds that are coming in, which fund those particular dues.
Right. And I think it's interesting that you point out that one of your biggest successes in Washington has been with SEIU 775, because one of our biggest victories in California, well, amongst several, is our push to get members away from SEIU 1000. And what we've seen is about 43% of their members are no longer paying dues, but they're still just as political as ever. So Matt and Ashley, I want to ask this question to both of you. Do you think people are fed up with the sort of blatant political stuff, or do you think there's some sort of grand, 4D chess move going on here that we just don't see? Why don't we start with Ashley?
Well, I think everybody's a little bit tired of politics right now because we've been inundated with postcards and commercials. I think that as people start paying attention to where their money is going, when they have to pay more attention to how much money they're getting during COVID, worried about furloughs, maybe someone in their family did lose their job, and so now they're having to be tighter with their pennies. It is offensive to know that even if you maybe like what the unions are giving money to, you'd rather have that decision for yourself. You'd rather be able to make the decision about where you want your money to go. I do think that a lot of people are kind of waking up to that right now, at least in 2020, but the whole year has been a dumpster fire anyway. So I'm game to wait and see what happens after the election. So
Fair enough. Matt, what do you think?
Ask the question again.
Sure. So the question here is, are people sort of fed up with SEIU's blatant, political interest? Do we think that this is driving opt-outs or anything?
I think that's always a factor in the opt-outs. However, my experience has been that the unions typically try and do a pretty good job vetting their members, and they actually keep track of them with lists for political indicators of those who are supportive of their political ideology, those who are more apolitical, and those who are opposed. And they actually send out different emails and different messaging based on that. So they try not to inundate people with political messaging that it will turn off. And again, as you know, part of what we do is try to inform the whole of the membership about the union's political expenditures, because yes, certainly there are a group of people who most certainly will opt out if they know what their union is doing. But you can't assume that they know their union is supporting a particular candidate or party or even a cause if the union isn't telling them that they're spending their money that way.
That's
one
fair.
of the greatest things unions do. They keep their members in the dark about what they're doing. So, and about their rights, which is again why the Freedom Foundation exists.
And I think that's exactly right, because just about every single time we send an email to public employees, we get a spectrum of responses, but at least one person will tell me, I had no idea they were spending money on this. I had no idea that, a lot of people don't even really know what they pay in union dues. They just sort of know what comes out of their paycheck. We sent an email to a union that we had never spoken to, or union members we had never spoken to before last week. And I had one person ask me, she didn't even know about the Janus decision. She still thought that if she tried to drop her union membership, that she would have to pay a fee or become a fee payer. And we're now 2+ years out. So this is, as Ashley said, exactly why we do what we do, because we don't trust unions to, tell people that they can leave. Why would they? Okay, well, we're going to take a quick little break, and then we will be right back. So thank you, guys. If you like what we do and you want to see more of it, please consider making a small financial contribution. The Freedom Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, and all donations are 100% tax deductible. Visit freedomfoundation.com/donate. All right, well, Matt, Ashley, thank you for sticking around after our break. Our final topic for today is a story that the Freedom Foundation wrote that has been trending. I think it's gotten a couple hundred shares since Matt wrote it a week or two ago. So Matt, can you go ahead and introduce the topic for us and tell us what it's about?
Sure. So I've been following the lockdown and some of the different proclamations in Washington state and wondering at what point we would have a special legislative session. It's been brought up several times by different newspapers having to do with the budgetary crisis we have and different requirements to call for a special legislative session. And so I thought I would highlight it, and I looked it up and was kind of shocked to find out the discrepancy between the last several years that the governor has been in office. And so I just kind of compared that. And so I guess the rough numbers would be there was 77 proclamations over the last 7 years, so an average of 11 a year. And as of this morning, we are up to 355 for this year alone, and still no call for a special legislative session.
So Matt, what would you find in a normal proclamation that we're finding is now different sort of during the era of COVID?
Sure. So, again, on average, there's 11, sometimes, 5 or 6, sometimes 14, 15 in a year. Usually proclamations are for declarations of state of emergency having to do with fires, floods, things of that nature. We've had a couple of those this year in our 355. But typically there's a few of those, and then calls for special legislative session. That's the purpose of the proclamation. The governor can call for a special legislative session. And in fact, out of those 77 proclamations over the last 7 years, 10 of them have been calls for special legislative session. We've averaged more than one per year over the last 7 years, and none this year. In fact, if you averaged it out, we would be at over 46 special legislative sessions this year. But, of course, we're at 0. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this has been an issue in Washington. I know it's been an issue in California, where Governor Newsom recently banned the sale of gas-powered cars by 2035. The sale firsthand, I should say. You could still buy them used. But he did that by, pen to paper, just signing a declaration. Do you know of anything like that that's happened in Washington, or are you guys still examining them?
I don't know if you're talking about a proclamation or executive order. Those are two different things. There have been a lot of other dictatorial orders that have been done in Washington, both by the governor and agencies below, well surpassing 500. But I haven't been looking into those details. I've really focused just specifically on the proclamations themselves. And within those, there are some questionable things, and we'll be looking into those in further detail. But at least for the most part, they at least somehow are related to COVID. And they represent part of the problem and part of the reason why we need to have a special legislative session. And that is, it's difficult for one person to be dictating the lives of 7 million people. And so we're constantly running into problems with these orders and how they don't work with our society and our businesses, and how unfairly they're treating different businesses. And so they're constantly having to go back and redress previous proclamations that were too broad. Specifically, people with lots of money and have the governor's ear, and different lobbying organizations you see getting exemptions carved out for them to be able to open their businesses and do things that weren't previously able to.
Okay. So this is a question that I want to pose to both of you. Do you think that there is some sort of benefit, not necessarily to the people, but to those in power, for sort of legislating from the bench, or not necessarily legislating from the bench, but legislating at the governor's desk? Because obviously, I don't think anyone wants to be held responsible directly for any of the terrible things that might happen from some of these, executive orders or proclamations or whatever. Do you think that by, the governor doing these kinds of things, that he is essentially just providing cover to the legislature?
I honestly think it's as simple as they're being drunk on power. I mean, they got a taste of tyrannical power like they have never been able to exercise in America before. And the fact that so many people decided to just go ahead and we were happy to 15 days to slow the spread, right? we're now 7 months into the 15 days of slowing the spread. I think that there are political agenda reasons why the shutdowns continue to strangle certain states and not others. I think a large part of it is the teachers' unions in some of these states. Other unions who see political advantage, who have, we've talked about before, purchased their politicians to do their bidding. That's why a lot of things I think are going to change after the election, regardless of, well, depending on the outcome. So I get very angry when we talk about our American life being upended by one person in control of an entire state and the various things that they're doing. They're going to shut down California's Thanksgiving. In Virginia, where I live, once a vaccine has been approved, our health director has said it's going to be mandated for everyone in Virginia. I mean, these are things that we never thought we would agree to in America 7 months ago.
Well, I got to tell you, Ashley, about the vaccine, California is going in a very different way with that. Our governor has said that any vaccine that comes to California will need to be independently approved by California. So we're kind of going in a different way from you'll take it and you'll like it. But Matt, I want to throw this.
You have a lot of anti-vaxxers though, don't you?
It's a weird amount for such a liberal state. But anyways, I want to throw this back to Matt. Matt, what do you think about the original question?
Yeah, so, I mean, if you look at Washington State, we originally had a bipartisan group of elected state legislators that were working with the governor to try and come up with a plan to reopen Washington and Washington's businesses. And the governor relatively quickly disbanded that bipartisan group of legislators and created the Safe Start groups that were handpicked people who are supporters of him directly financially to his campaign and to his political party. And you no longer have this bipartisan group of state legislators. So to Ashley's point, I think there was clearly a power grab there. But more specifically to your point, I do think that there is political calculus here. It's widely believed that the governor is safe and that there is very little chance of him being defeated in his reelection campaign. So it doesn't make any difference if he takes the heat because they don't believe that he can lose. But there are plenty of state legislators that are in contested districts that could lose votes for closing down businesses and creating a lot of the problems that they're doing with the mask mandates, forcing businesses to require masks that lead to confrontations in businesses. They can't afford to lose any votes. They don't want to be on the record. And we've seen this a lot in the past with big votes where elected officials would rather not go on the record. And I think that that is part of it. And another reason why I don't think that they're having a legislative session is that we are in a budgetary crisis in Washington and we would have to raise taxes, and they're going to raise taxes. But the last thing in the world the party that is in control wants to do is bring the legislature back into session and raise taxes right before the election.
That makes a lot of sense. I got to say, that's really well broken down. Well, Matt, Ashley, I think we are just about out of time for today, but I want to thank you both for coming on. And for those listening at home, please check back with us soon. We'll have a new episode up.